The Hargrove estate smelled like old money and fresh contempt. Tilda noticed it the moment she stepped through the side entrance, the one the caterers used, the one with the scuff marks on the doorframe and the flickering light that nobody had bothered to fix because nobody important ever came through here. Gardenias and champagne, and underneath it all, something that said, "You don't belong here, and everyone knows it." She smoothed the front of her dress with both hands. Navy blue, polyester blend, bought off the rack at a consignment shop on Mercer Street 3 years ago. She'd steamed it twice this week. It still looked like what it was. Oh, her stepsister's voice carried across the foyer before Tilda had even cleared the doorway. "You actually came." Rennie stood at the base of the grand staircase in a gown the color of champagne. Actual champagne, not the cheap kind, with her hair pinned up in that effortless way that had taken, Tilda knew, approximately 3 hours and 2 stylists. She had a glass in her hand and a smile on her face that didn't reach anything above her cheekbones. "Dad said to come," Tilda said. "Dad says a lot of things." Rennie tilted her head. "That dress is very practical." The women standing behind her, all in silk, all holding identical flutes, didn't even bother hiding their amusement. One of them actually pressed her lips together to keep from laughing out loud. She didn't press hard enough. Tilda didn't flinch. She'd had a long time to practice not flinching. "Where is he?" she asked. Rennie waved one hand in the direction of the main ballroom. The gesture was dismissive in a way that required practice, the kind of casual cruelty that got refined over years. "Somewhere being embarrassing, probably. Try not to let anyone know you're with us, would you? Some of Vane's people are here tonight." Vane. The name landed differently than the others. Tilda had heard it twice this week, once from the man at the credit union who'd gone pale when she mentioned her father's name, and once from the neighbor 2 floors below who'd asked, very quietly, whether her father had found himself another card game. She hadn't understood either conversation at the time. She was beginning to. She moved past Rennie without answering. There was nothing to say that wouldn't cost her something, and she was already running a deficit. The ballroom of the Hargrove estate held approximately 200 people and approximately 200 opinions about everyone else in the room. Tilda stood near the east wall, with a glass of water she wasn't drinking, and catalogued them out of habit. The woman in the red dress whose smile got tighter every time her husband leaned toward the brunette at the bar. The man near the window who kept checking his watch, both wrists alternating like he couldn't decide which one to believe. The 2 men by the service corridor who weren't drinking and weren't talking to anyone, and were watching the room the same way Tilda was, except they were being paid for it. Her father found her before she found him. Tilda. He materialized at her elbow with a champagne flute and the particular expression he'd worn her entire life. Warmth at the surface, calculation just underneath. "You look, don't," she said. He switched tracks smoothly. "I'm glad you came. There are people here I want you to meet. You said it was a dinner. It is a dinner. It's also..." He paused, adjusted the cufflink on his left sleeve, which meant he was choosing his words. "There's a man here tonight. Kiovan Vane. You may have heard the name. I've heard it twice this week from people who looked scared when they said it." Her father's smile went professional. The one he used when a negotiation wasn't going the way he'd planned. "He's a businessman, an important one. I owe him a certain amount of money, and there's been a discrepancy in my records that I can't account for. I need someone who can look at the numbers." Tilda set her water glass on a passing tray. "You need an accountant. I need you. I'm not your accountant, Dad. I'm your daughter. Those aren't the same thing. I know that." He put a hand on her arm. She noticed he didn't say "I'm sorry." He never said that. "I just need you to look at one set of ledgers, one night. That's all." She looked at him, at the grey that had crept into his temples since the last time she'd seen him, at the way his collar sat slightly wrong, at the champagne in his hand that she would bet money he hadn't touched. He was scared. Her father, who had navigated 30 years of bad decisions with the confidence of a man who believed consequences happened to other people, was scared. She said, "Show me the numbers." The study was on the 2nd floor. At the end of a hallway that got quieter the farther you walked. Her father unlocked the door with a key he kept on a separate ring from the rest, which told her something. The desk held a laptop, 2 ledgers, and a coffee mug with a ring stain at the bottom that suggested it had been here for days. Tilda sat down. She opened the first ledger. The numbers were a disaster. Not in the way that meant someone had made mistakes. Mistakes were fixable. They had a kind of innocent logic to them. This was something else. The columns looked right at first. The entries were neat, the totals added. But if you followed the money backward, if you traced each figure to its source the way she'd been doing since she was 16 years old and first understood that her father's business partnerships didn't have clean paperwork, something was missing. Something had been redirected. Deliberately, carefully, over 18 months. Someone had been skimming from Kiovan Vane, and they'd done it through her father's accounts. She was on the 3rd page of the second ledger when she heard the door open. She didn't look up immediately. She'd learned that from years of doing this, if you look up, the moment someone walks in, they know they have your attention. She finished the line she was reading, noted the figure, and then looked up. The man in the doorway was not her father. He was tall in the way that didn't need to announce itself. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of fit that was either expensive or just him. He had the kind of face that had been good-looking once and was now something more interesting than that. A jaw that had been broken and reset slightly wrong, a scar that ran along his left cheekbone from somewhere near his eye to somewhere near his ear, and eyes that were doing the same thing Tilda's had been doing in the ballroom. Cataloguing, calculating, deciding. He looked at her for a moment without saying anything. Then he looked at the ledger in front of her. "Those are mine," he said. His voice was the kind of quiet that didn't need volume, the kind that rooms reorganized themselves around. "I know," Tilda said. "Your money's been redirected. 18 months, looks like. Small enough amounts that the totals still balanced if you didn't look too closely." She turned the ledger so he could see the page. Someone was counting on the fact that most people don't look closely enough. He didn't move from the doorway. "Who are you?" "Tilda Marsh. My father's Philip." She caught herself. "Warren Marsh." "He told me there was a discrepancy." "A discrepancy," Vane repeated. Something shifted in the way he was looking at her. Not warmer, more precise. "Is that what he called it?" "He's scared," she said. "He doesn't know what he's looking at." "I do." "What are you looking at?" She tapped the page. Someone laundered a diversion through his accounts. 18 entries over 73 weeks. The amounts escalate by about 3% each time, which is the kind of pattern that looks like normal variance until you chart it. She paused. "You have someone on the inside who's been doing this long enough to know your patterns. They know how much attention these accounts get. They knew to keep the amounts below the threshold." He was quiet for a long moment, the kind of quiet that had weight. "You figured this out in..." He glanced at his watch, a gesture so slight it barely registered. 12 minutes. 14, she said. "The first 2 I spent figuring out what kind of disaster I was looking at." Something happened at the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a smile exactly. It was the place where a smile might happen if the conditions were right and someone had the patience to wait. "Marsh?" he said. It wasn't a question. "Tilda Vane," he said. And then, after a pause that felt like a decision, "Sit back down." She sat back down. He crossed the room, not quickly, not like he was hurrying toward anything, but with the particular deliberateness of a man who moved through spaces knowing they would rearrange themselves around him, and pulled the chair from the corner, the one that wasn't really meant for sitting, and placed it beside the desk at an angle that put the ledger between them. Not close, not far, adjacent. "Show me," he said. So she showed him. Entry by entry, she walked him through it. He didn't interrupt. He asked one question, midway through the second ledger, about whether the routing numbers matched a secondary set of accounts she hadn't seen. She said she'd need to see them to answer that, and he pulled out a phone and made a call in a language she didn't recognize, and 6 minutes later, a man she'd never seen came through the door with a flash drive. The secondary accounts confirmed it, the same pattern, the same 3% escalation, the same careful, patient hand. "It's not your father," Vane said, when she'd finished. "No," she agreed. "He doesn't have the attention span for this kind of long game." She'd been thinking it since the second ledger. Whoever did this watched your accounts long enough to know what normal looked like. That's not someone who's afraid of you. It's someone who thinks they know how to stay invisible. They were right for 73 weeks. They were right until I sat down. He looked at her again. That same cataloguing look. She met it because she had run out of the kind of energy required to look away from things, and besides, she had the feeling that looking away from Kiovan Vane was the kind of decision that told him something you might not want him to know. "What do you do?" he asked. "Professionally, bookkeeping, small businesses. Nothing like this." "Why not?" "Because people with accounts like yours don't usually advertise the opening," she said. "And I'm not the kind of person who gets those calls." He was quiet. Outside, somewhere below them, she could hear the party, the low drone of 200 conversations, a string quartet playing something she couldn't identify, the occasional burst of laughter that rang slightly too bright. "Your father owes me $400,000, Vane said, without looking away from her. "The diversion accounts for approximately 260. The rest is his." She didn't flinch. She'd known, roughly, since the first ledger. "I know. I need someone who can audit the rest of my accounts, find out what else they touched." He paused. "And I need someone who can do it without talking about it afterward." The room was very quiet. "That's a job offer," she said. "It's a conversation," he said. "A job offer looks different. What does it look like?" He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket, a motion so contained it barely registered, and placed a card on the desk, plain white, a phone number, nothing else. "My people will contact your father about the balance," he said. He stood. "The 140 is still owed. That part doesn't change." She picked up the card. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of cardstock that cost something. "And if I call?" He looked at her from the doorway. In the light from the hallway behind him, the scar along his cheek caught differently, silver almost. "Then we discuss the rest," he said, and left. She sat in the study for 4 minutes after he was gone. Then she closed both ledgers, put the flash drive on top of them, and went back downstairs. Rennie was exactly where she'd been before, still at the base of the staircase, still surrounded by the same women, the champagne glass replaced, but the posture identical. She watched Tilda cross the foyer with the expression of someone watching something mildly inexplicable. "You were gone forever," Rennie said. "What were you doing up there?" "Working," Tilda said. "Working." Rennie's mouth curved. "At a party, in that dress." She turned back to her friends, the dismissal as clean as a door closing. Tilda didn't stop walking. She found her coat on the rack near the side entrance, the caterer's entrance, the scuff-marked one, and put it on. Her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize, Miss Marsh. "Mr. Vane asked me to tell you the car is available if you need it." She stared at the message for a moment. Then she looked back at the ballroom, at the light and the noise, and the 200 people who hadn't noticed her arrive and wouldn't notice her leave. She typed back, "I have my own ride. 3 seconds." Of course. The offer stands. She pushed through the side door into the cold air of the parking lot. Overhead, the sky was the particular orange-black of a city that never got fully dark, and somewhere behind her the party continued without her, as it always had. Her phone buzzed again. "One more thing. The name you're looking for, the person who ran the diversion, isn't in the ledgers. Check the approval signatures on the secondary transfers. 3rd column from the right, you'll see it." She stood in the parking lot in her polyester dress and her 3-year-old shoes and looked at the message for a long time. She typed, "Why are you telling me this?" The reply came immediately. "Because you would have found it anyway. I'd rather you found it for me." She found it. It took her 4 days, working from scans she'd requested under a pretext she'd constructed carefully, using access she technically didn't have and channels she'd rather not describe. The approval signatures on the secondary transfers, 3rd column from the right, just as he'd said, belonged to a man named Corwin Dell, who had worked as a financial intermediary for Vane's operation for 11 years and who had, apparently, Spent the last 18 himself an exit fund. She called the number on the card. He answered on the second ring. No greeting. Just. Tell me. She told him. The name, the account numbers, the routing trace, the pattern that became undeniable when you laid all three ledgers side by side and looked at the timing of Corwin Dell's personal transfers versus the diversion entries. 11 years of access, 18 months of patience, a 3% escalation that was designed to look like inflation variance. He listened without interrupt. When she was done, there was a silence that lasted long enough for her to consider that she had just handed information about a very dangerous man's financial operation to another very dangerous man, and that her own position in this situation was not exactly what you'd call secure. "Where are you?" Vane asked. "My apartment? I'll send someone." "I don't." She stopped, reconsidered. "I'd rather come to you." Another pause, shorter this time. 12 Alderman Street, he said. "Second floor. Tell the door you're expected." "Tell the door," she repeated. "You'll understand when you get there." She understood when she got there. 12 Alderman Street looked like a shipping company from the outside, weathered signage, loading bay doors, the kind of building that discouraged curiosity. The door she found was unmarked, steel, and had a speaker panel where a handle should have been. She said her name. There was a pause, and then a buzz, and the door opened. The second floor was not what the outside of the building suggested. Clean lines. Quiet. The kind of space that had been designed by someone who understood that real power didn't need to announce itself. No exposed brick, no dramatic lighting, just good furniture and the kind of silence that came from excellent soundproofing. A woman at a desk near the stairs looked at Tilda once and went back to her screen without speaking. Vane was at a table near the window with two other men, looking at something spread across the surface that Tilda didn't try to see. He looked up when she came in and said something to the men in the same language she hadn't recognized before, and they left. "You came yourself," he said. "You said you'd send someone." She set her bag on the chair nearest her. "I don't like being picked up. Most people don't argue with the offer. I'm not most people." He considered this. It seemed to register as a data point rather than a challenge. Filed somewhere, weighted, categorized. He gestured at the table. "Show me." She sat down and opened her bag and spread the printouts in the order she'd arranged them at home, the sequence that made the story clearest. He pulled his chair over and sat beside her. Not across, beside, the way he'd sat in the study at the Hargrove estate, and she walked him through it again. Slower this time, because she'd had 4 days to understand it better, and because this time she wasn't working against a clock. He asked 3 questions. All 3 were precise. Not the questions of someone trying to catch up, the questions of someone who already understood the framework and was checking the load-bearing points. When she finished, he sat back. "You could have sent this," he said. "I could have," she agreed. "Why didn't you?" She thought about how to answer that. The honest answer was complicated. Part practical, part something else she hadn't fully examined yet. She went with the practical part. "Because documents can be misread. I wanted to be here when you looked at them." He looked at her for a long moment. "We knew the name by end of day yesterday. You knew before I called. I had the name. I didn't have the full picture," he paused. "You gave me the full picture." She nodded slowly. "So we're done. Your father's debt," he said it without expression. "The 140 still stands. That wasn't conditional." "He knows. He'll be contacted about a payment arrangement." He said it the way someone says the matter is decided, which was a different thing from the matter is resolved. "That's separate from this." "This," she repeated. "You mean the work. I mean the job." She looked at him. Outside the window, small high, letting in a narrow angle of afternoon light, the city went about its business, entirely unaware of this room. "You said a job offer looks different," she said. "It does." He reached into the inside pocket again, the same measured motion, and placed a folder on the table. "That's what it looks like." She opened it, read it carefully, the way she read everything. Twice, because the first time was for content and the second was for what wasn't there. "This is a consulting contract," she said. "Yes." For a shipping company, among other things. She looked up. He was watching her with that same expression, not patience exactly, but the willingness to let silence do the work. "If I sign this," she said, "I'm working for you. You're working for Alderman Consolidated, which is a shipping company." The edge of his mouth, that place where a smile considered existing. "Among other things, and my father's debt is your father's debt," he said. "Not yours. I want to be clear about that." She hadn't expected that. She'd been prepared for the other version, the version where the contract was the mechanism, where signing meant absorbing something that wasn't hers. She'd prepared arguments. She'd even written 2 of them down on the train coming over. She hadn't prepared for this. Why asked, he was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the same quality it always did. Low, uninflected, giving nothing away, and somehow, because of that, giving everything away. "Because I need someone who reads numbers the way you do," he said. "Not someone who owes me, someone who chooses to be here." The room was very still. Outside, a car horn somewhere on Alderman Street, a distant siren. The city, doing what cities do, not stopping for anyone. Tilda looked at the contract. She thought about the consignment shop dress and the caterer's entrance, and Rennie's expression and the 4 days she'd spent on a problem that wasn't hers, that she'd solved anyway because the numbers had been wrong, and she couldn't leave wrong numbers alone. She thought about the card. Heavy, heavier than it looked. She picked up the pen. "There are 2 clauses in Section 4 that are ambiguous," she said. Something shifted in the way he was watching her. Still not a smile. Still that same place where one might form, given time, given the right conditions. "Tell me which ones," he said. She did. He listened. He crossed out 1 clause entirely and rewrote the second one, longhand in the margin, with a handwriting that was smaller and neater than she would have expected from him. Then she signed it. He took the contract, looked at her signature, set it aside. "Monday," he said. 8 o'clock. 8 is early." "Yes," he agreed and did not change it. She put the pen down, stood, picked up her bag. "Marsh," he said, as she was turning to leave. She turned back. He was still sitting at the table, the folder in front of him, the city's narrow light crossing the room at an angle between them. "You found what no one else found," he said. "I don't forget that." She didn't know what to do with that, so she did what she always did with things she didn't know what to do with. She filed it, weighted it, noted its position. "Monday," she said. 8 o'clock. She left. In the elevator going down, she stood with her bag on her shoulder and looked at her reflection in the steel doors. Wavery, imprecise, the way reflections got in polished metal, navy polyester. Sensible shoes. The face of a woman who had walked into a very dangerous room and come out with a job in both her hands. The doors opened. She walked out into the afternoon, into the ordinary noise and light of a city that didn't know anything had changed, and for the first time in longer than she could precisely remember, she didn't count her steps to the corner. She already knew where she was going.